Welcome to the Gold Newsletter Podcast, your bank of knowledge of investment, economics, and geopolitics. Go to goldnewsletter.com for our publications and archives.
This is the Gold Newsletter Podcast. Fergus Hodgson, your host, joined by Brian London in New Orleans. We're so excited to have you back again, to be broadcasting again. And we have an old friend, Charles Goyette. He is an author and radio broadcaster. And his latest book is The Last Gold Rush, which we're going to discuss today. Charles, welcome to the show.
Fergus, thank you very much for having me on. Brian, great to talk to you as always.
And Charles, I still remember speaking with you years ago at one of the New Orleans investment conferences. And we must have that video up somewhere. But this book, The Last Gold Rush, I mean, I know books are inclined towards hyperbole, but how do you know this is the last one?
Yeah, well, thank you for starting with that. That's a softball for me because even some of the publicity people that I work with and people in media and stuff say, oh, the last gold rush, they think it's about prospectors and miners and so on. And it's certainly not about that. But I have lived through, and I'm sure Brian has lived through periods when even the American people stood in line around the corner to buy gold. And the same sort of thing has gone on all over the world. Earlier this year in Germany, the same phenomena demonstrated itself a little bit. And I understand even in the last couple of days, lines are queuing up outside the gold dealers in Germany. So we're describing the last gold rush ever as the last gold rush in the US dollar as presently constituted. And as you know, and as your viewers know, the US dollar has seen several different incarnations, let's say over the last 100 years. There was the gold dollar that you take a $20 gold piece to the treasury or to any bank and get, or a $20 bill and get a gold. You could, they were indistinguishable, the US dollar and gold. It was a convenience to carry the paper, but you could always get the gold. And that changed to the gold exchange standard. And now we're on the new dollar standard, which has prevailed for a generation or two, which is the nothing standard, or as Jim Grant calls it, the PhD standard. The quantity and quality of US dollars is whatever a bunch of PhDs in the Eccles building decide it's going to be on any given day. So it's backed by nothing. And we think that this incarnation of the US dollar in its present form has exhausted itself. The signs are everywhere. And so we believe that this is the last gold rush in the US dollar.
Charles, Brian here. I certainly agree that we seem to be accelerating toward a great reset at some point. And you know, you and I have been in this business for a long time, and we've seen so many people take the stage at New Orleans Investment Conference and other conferences over the decades, really talking about the debt bomb and how it was going to blow up. It never has. But now it just seems to me that it's a matter of simple math, that we can never have real interest rates that are positive, on an inflation adjusted basis ever again, because the cost to service that debt would just destroy the federal budget. Simply couldn't afford it. So at every time that there is some sort of an economic slowdown, the Fed has always lowered rates. Well, now that they're at zero, they can't go much lower. Of course, it could go negative, but how much more can they do? But they will do something. They'll print more dollars. They'll try to keep the ship afloat, the house of cards intact, et cetera. At some point, there's going to have to be a serious loss of credibility in the US dollar and other fiat currencies as well. So, my view is there's going to be a reset at some point. There's going to be some reattachment in some way between the dollar and perhaps other fiat currencies and gold as a way of kind of instantly restoring credibility to the fiat currencies. I just don't know whether it's going to go through one more cycle or two or three more cycles of boom bust reinflation before it finally happens. But I think you take the Peter Schiff approach. You think this is the big one. This is it.
Yeah, we think this is the big one, and we muster the evidence, and it's a pretty deep dive. The book isn't just buy gold and everything will be wonderful in your life, but it explores the reasons why this is qualitatively different. All bull markets in gold all secular bull markets are driven by things like money printing and by unstable currency. In other words, by unpayable debt and things like this. This is always the case driving bull markets. But this one is a little bit different. And we describe it this way, that if an arson investigator comes on the scene of the crime, he doesn't just look at the raw material, the lumber, for example, that burned up, the particle board or whatever it may have been. He looks for the accelerants, the things that were used to spread the blaze and to drive it to a conflagration. And so our book is a description of these accelerants as well. So the two basic fundamentals, of course, are monetary policy and the US debt. And these are frightening enough in their own terms, but our deep dive says this is the basis of all gold bull markets. But there's something different about this one that will drive it to, we think, unimaginable new heights. And those things are, we call them accelerants. So there are a number of accelerants. The war on cash is a good example that justifies a book in its own right entirely. The end of the global American military empire. All of these are conditions that haven't really existed in prior bull markets. So as you remember, the bull market of the late 70s and the beginning of 1980, or the one that topped out in 2011 in gold, you don't remember the American military empire collapsing. But in slow motion, it is going on right now, and it has huge implications for us. We are dependent on the kindness of foreign strangers to fund our debt, and yet we are continuing to make enemies all over the world. Mike Pompeo runs around, trying to impose sanctions and crippling economic regimes on countries all over the world. And for the first time since the post-World War II era got underway, for the first time, they are encountering a strange and unfamiliar resistance to the United States global diplomatic hegemony. And this throws everything off. But the evidence, you've written about the evidence of this same sort of thing happening with the central banks of the world beginning to move the reserves that they once held in dollars into gold. So this is qualitatively different. We have the ending of the New World Order, which is the world order that came into place after World War II, the Bretton Woods post-World War II order of U.S. global hegemony. That is ending. We are overextended militarily and with mutual defense treaties all over the world, which may be invoked at a cost that we can't afford. And really the problem of these things is that when the leadership, and I don't care whether you're talking about Republicans or Democrats, whether you're talking about Donald Trump or Joe Biden, when you're talking about the House or the Senate, when the leadership of the United States looks at this problem of resistance to its global hegemony, diplomatic resistance, Europeans that don't want to go along with the program, for example, they think that the problem is a shortfall in military might. And so they boost the military budget. But, this is an example of something that's been known for decades called Imperial Overstretch. So all of that spending on military might, because they think that we're being dissed on the international stage, all of that drains resources from the domestic economy and the prosperity of the people, which made the might of the empire possible to begin with. So we're in a kind of a doomsday loop here. And that is one of the other elements, the accelerants of what we call the last gold rush ever.
Charles, do you want to make that connection though? When we think that the U.S. military dominance is on the way out, how does that connect to the end of the U.S. dollar and therefore a natural exit to gold?
Yeah. So the military empire and the dollar are coextensive with one another. And people always ask me when I talk about these things, well, how do you know when it's over? And you really know when it's over for the present regime. And it's nothing new in the world of currencies for a currency to lose its status internationally, to lose its present configuration. I mean, Brazil's been through 5 currencies in the last 25 years. It's nothing, but Americans are a little bit detached about this. If many places in Europe, you look around and, you have the national monuments and the signs of history gone by that show you that the government won't always be the government. I have thousands of years of displays that the money won't always be the money. But Americans somehow believe, well, the government, after 250 years or something, they think, oh, the government will always be the government. The money will always be the money. But this isn't the case anywhere around the rest of the world. So the US dollar has been coextensive with the US military empire. And as the empire fades, I did a radio commentary for a couple of years on stations all over the country with Ron Paul. And he used to say, when the United States finds itself in trouble, with its back against the wall, it will be surprised at how few foreigners come to its aid, that there's a lot of built up resentment against the United States and its imperial ways that will manifest in a crisis period. And so rather than continuing, for example, to fund America's military empire or America's growing and unpayable national debt, the rest of the world is already showing evincing signs of backing off. So we see, and it would be the first time that an empire and the reach of its currency on a global stage have unwound at the same time.
Charles, I know you've never been accused as being a master of understatement, but in this case, I think you may have a bit. You said this phenomenon of imperial overreach has been known for decades, but one of the things I stress over and over again to our readers and listeners and viewers is that it actually goes back millennia. As long as the human race has been around and living in some organized fashion, it's happened over and over again. Civilizations, governments have overextended themselves, usually through military campaigns and mischief. But even in the case of ancient Rome, that was extended into entitlement spending, bread and circuses, and other, every other manner of extravagance. And there were some people back then, like Cicero, who saw it happening as it was happening. And it was, they saw it happening. It was a slow process. It took, in the case of Rome, a couple of centuries to happen. But we're ourselves, a good 50, 60 years into it. If you look at the decline in the purchasing power of the US dollar since the guns and butter age of the mid-1960s, when they took silver out of US silver coinage, the dollar's already lost 88% of its purchasing power. And you can plot that, and I do in my presentations, against the collapse of the value or the silver content of the Roman denarius. And you just see it's a great analog chart. They just track. And then you look at where it goes from there, and it's not a pretty picture.
Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire comes to a really self-evident conclusion. It said, well, basically, after 6 volumes or however much he did, basically the empire collapsed of its own overweight. And the same thing is going on. In fact, you talk about, the bread and circuses of Rome and the welfare development of Rome and the socialism that became Roman. And this is another accelerant that we address in the book. Another accelerant of the last gold rush ever is the newfound popularity of American socialism. And it is a little bit astonishing. You wonder, how many laboratory experiments does the world need in this? We have what's going on right under our eyes in Venezuela, but in one of my books, I posted the picture of the Korean peninsula at night, which was, illuminated in the south. All the cities and the coastlines were lit up, and then there's a strict line of demarcation, and everything north of that was plunged into darkness. We have, East Germany and West Germany. We have the Soviet Union. We have a lifetime of experiences with socialism, and yet it's found a new wellspring of popularity in America. And boy, if that's not an accelerant for the decline of the country, then nothing is.
Yeah, it's an interesting, getting back to that comparison to ancient Rome, it was baked in the cake, you might say, when they went from a republic to an empire. And you started having Roman emperors. You had a couple of good ones there, but got an awful lot of really degenerate ones as well. And you look at the reemergence, the rise in the 20th century of communism and socialism, and then you see it returning as somewhat of a fad in the U.S. There's really not any difference. It's all collectivism. It's all central authority, whether it's socialism, whether it's communism and all those different flavors, or dictatorship, an empire. You eventually see all power devolving to those at the top, and that is the end of many a civilization throughout human history.
Yeah, and I think that the American people need an education about what is driving it, and you can chart, in my view, you can chart the growth of popularity of socialism and socialist mores among the younger generations, Generation X, and some of them with things like the banker bailout. They see the polarization of wealth in the United States. And, financial assets are held by the upper class. The financial assets are held by the well-to-do. And when you spend years driving a monetary policy that drives an increase in financial assets like stocks, the inevitable result is a further polarization. The wealthy are holding assets that go up in value because of the monetary policy, and those that aren't wealthy don't hold those assets, and the polarization grows and the discontent grows, and then people become susceptible to the snake oil, the medicine oil of things like AOC and socialist something for everybody policies, spend our way to prosperity.
And Charles, are you trying to educate Americans as to why this is a bad idea, or just trying to instruct people how to prepare for it because you feel like it's an inevitability at this point?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I have you see my hair is gray, but you can see in my long years, I've vacillated back and forth. I mean, I thought for a long time that my job was to educate Americans and there would be a great revival and awakening and love for freedom. And then, years on, I got discouraged with a couple of very visible setbacks. I thought, well, okay, it's every man for himself, man the lifeboat. So I started writing things that, were for the individual. And then I thought, well, it's not always hopeless and it's always dark before the dawn, and maybe we can awaken the American people again. And so I go back and forth. I'm not very constant about it. But in this book, I thought it would be good to go back to the very beginning and explain in detail why these things happen and what the fuel is that's going to make it burn brighter. As I say, it is a deep dive, but it's written in a way that everybody can understand for themselves where this goes and how it ends as it progresses over the coming months.
If this is the end of American exceptionalism, maybe I'm putting words in your mouth there, are you inclined to favor people looking elsewhere or looking beyond the United States for their investments?
Well, I have a lot of friends that do that, and it's a subject of frequent conversations. It's not my forte. I don't know. In my case, I have family, and I don't want to live out of the country because I don't want to leave my family members that I love, and I enjoy, spending holidays with family and stuff. So it's very hard for me to come to terms with leaving and taking my wealth, expatriating and so on. So that's not what the book is about. But I cite people in there that are involved in doing those sorts of things. And for those for whom it makes sense, I certainly wouldn't stand in their way or try to argue with them otherwise. I think that the crisis has a potential of getting very bad. And with the Great Reset and with the resistance that we're seeing growing to the dictates that come out of Washington, there's a huge movement for decentralization. Even people now in the mainstream are talking about the forbidden S word of succession. And I'm not here to predict that will happen. But if people aren't allowed to return to their own volition about how they live their lives, if the things that the government does are not like education, which is if you think about it, everything the government does is basically a failure. Education is a failure. The monetary system that it runs is a failure. The health system that it runs is a failure. Yet things that the government doesn't run, like my smartphones and my HD TV and all those things, they're all wonderful successes. So I think if we don't have some sort of relinquishing of power and control appetite by Washington to rule our lives in terms of medicine in terms of education, in terms of currency, if there's not some sort of liberation on those fronts, that there will be a breakdown and there will be a secessionist movement.
But Charles, if you're not preaching that everybody has to straighten up and love liberty and everything else, I think you are telling people, though, that they need to prepare. That's kind of what we do as well. It's wonderful to see the timing of your book, and that it came out in October when gold was still in a correction, yet literally in the blink of an eye, or figuratively in the blink of an eye, after its publication, what you were talking about seems to be happening right now with the metals beginning to rally once again, and the Federal Reserve, as of yesterday when we're talking, coming out and really giving the green light to a further depreciation, at least on a relative basis of other currencies, of the dollar, and showing that there's not any end in sight to their quantitative easing. There's no end in sight to their zeroed interest rate policies. And in fact, there's more to come if they don't see it, enough help from the fiscal end of the equation.
Well, it reminds me of that old expression that when you're holding a hammer, everything looks like a nail. They have no other tool. And so every crisis has to be met by one variation or another on money printing. And, the worse the crisis, the more desperate they get. And so we get, the hugely inflated quantitative easing of 2020. It's like nobody learned any lessons of 2008 and 9 and 10 and 11, but they're going to do it all over again, and they do it bigger. And, Powell is the wrong guy in the wrong place. And, we used to be worried about Keynesianism and the Keynesian myth that, while they'll deficit spend in bad times and good times, they'll restore the resources and they'll run a surplus, and then they'll have dry powder for the next downturn. That's history. And now, since COVID hit, and since COVID-19 in March, we're really in the age of modern monetary theory. And more than one person has made the point with Yellen's appointment to head the Treasury. We are dissolving the lines between the Treasury and the Fed, because modern monetary theory, which before COVID-19 I would have thought would have taken a lot of selling for people to make the policy of the United States, it hasn't taken any at all. The crisis, the pandemic, the lockdown just provided a huge opportunity for money printing gone absolutely wild. And I think Yellen's appointment to the Treasury is a sign that the lines are going to be blurred now between the Treasury and the Fed.
Okay, Charles, let me just give you a website for the listeners here. It is charlesgoyette.com, and Goyette is Goyette.com. Of course, we always have the links and on our show notes page, which is goldnewsletter.com/podcast. If you have not already, please subscribe on YouTube, SoundCloud, wherever you are, and stay in tune for all our shows. Charles, is there any other final message you want to share before we let you go?
Well, I'd like people to take a good look at some of the other things that are going on that we didn't really talk about. The war on cash, the trade war, these are other accelerants. And I think they will come away from the book realizing that while it's true, and we start right in with the monetary authorities, I call them the deep state money manipulators. It's true that the money crisis is out of proportion, the debt is out of proportion. There are, for the first time ever, all of these things converging in a malevolent way right now that will drive this conflagration. In fact, as David Stockman says in the introduction to the book, it will drive gold to heights that people that don't read the book may never have imagined. So
Brian,
anyway, you guys do such great work, and I'm so grateful to be on your program.
Brian, I sense you've got another point to make. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that I was very glad to have you on, Charles, because I was so impressed with the book. I see everybody's book that comes out. I get review copies of everything, but yours is, you and your co-author were just presented. I mean, you take a big picture view, cover a lot of the topics that I talk about every month in Gold Newsletter, but a lot more. And it's very accessible. It's very well written. It reads like, an adventure series or adventure novel that we're in the midst of. And it leads to a very powerful conclusion. that everyone needs to be prepared for. So great job. I really urge all of our listeners and viewers to get a copy.
Thank you. That's a great endorsement. Next time I'll ask you to write one that I can put on the back of the book jacket. Thank you, Brian. That's great.
Yeah, the title is The Last Gold Rush Ever: 7 Reasons for the Runaway Gold Market and How You Can Profit from It by Charles Goyette. Charles, I look forward to next time. Cheers.
Fergus, thank you so much too. I appreciate you guys very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.